Welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going well, but I'm anticipating my right arm is going to get very tired from holding this microphone.
That's right. We are in our mobile podcasting studio here. So holding our mics instead of using our fancy mic stands back at home. Also, I mean, it's been a while since we've done a new recording. So I think we're both a little rusty. I had to remind you to pick up your microphone.
Well, usually I don't. It's usually a mic stand. But
just right in front of you, ready to go.
We are into the new year, though, and Happy New Year.
Yes, hopefully everyone had a great holiday. I'm very excited. We are now, I guess, we're at like kind of quitters week. So this week's episode, I think, is going to keep you on track for whatever your New Year's resolution is.
Week now. This is like Boxing Day.
Yeah,
it's become a whole week.
Exactly. Yeah, they've really gone from Quitters Day being, I believe it was like January 17th to now it's like the 16th through the 28th is really like Quitters time. It's just like that time where most people abandon their New Year's resolutions. But again, like I say, I think Remy on this episode today is going to convince you to stick with whatever it is that you have on tap. Remy Kloos is an adventurer, a mountaineer. She's done all of the seven summits, which we get into what exactly that is if you're not familiar with mountaineering lingo, but suffice to say, it is a lot. And honestly, it's
at least seven.
Yeah,
there you go. Okay.
It is such an inspiring, fun conversation. So, whether you're thinking about wanting to climb Everest or Denali or any of those, or, you want to do your first 100-mile gravel race or running race or whatever the heck, I think this episode's a really good one for just really talking about how you don't have to be this, kind of imaginary person in order to achieve these goals. Remy she didn't grow up doing these climbs or anything. This is a really like a bit later in life. I mean, she's still pretty young, but like later in life decision to do this. And she made it happen. And as she'll tell you, like there's nothing special or super unique or super powered about her. She just kind of has figured it out one step at a time, literally one step.
Well, and I'm excited that we're getting into some of these other sports, a little outside of our usual running and cycling and strength training.
Remember back when we used to interview like NFL players? That was weird.
And what we like about that is that there's so many of these similarities in the training, in the mindset, the tools, the tactics. Just how do you keep going, over this mountain, but then you still have 6 more mountains. And then even on that mountain, working step by step or base camp by base camp or whatever the increment is, definitely relates to, mile by mile or race by race, season by season.
Yeah. And what I also really liked about that is also, what do you do when you've hit all 7 summits?
Oh, what's next? Yes, the Ironman burnout. This is like the 7 summit burnout.
And I mean, this can take years to accomplish, which I think actually the bigger the goal, I think the harder the potential letdown is. Yeah. Bigger the peak, the harder the fall. And we do talk about, what do you do when you've accomplished that huge goal that you thought was going to take decades? So, all right, I think we should get into this. Let the mindset motivation just wash over you and enjoy this conversation with Remy Kloos. All right, Remy, welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. I'm so excited we're finally getting to do this.
Thank you for having me, Molly, and I'm super excited. I'm like in awe of everything you do. So just excited to have this opportunity.
Oh my gosh, well, the feeling is very, very mutual. And side note, I tend to, whenever we finish the podcast, I always do like a little dancey thing. So I'm glad that you've kicked it off with that. That means we're going to get along real good. Okay. Okay, so I want to start with your bio because I love that you kind of embrace these multiple identities. And I think that's just so, so important and such an important part of your story. So I'm going to read it here. I'm a passionate adventurer, high altitude mountaineer, free spirit, sustainability specialist, and mental health ambassador. Realize that's a mouthful, but for the longest time, I didn't know where I fitted in until I realized I did not have to. Okay, I love it. How long did it take you to come up with this bio and sort of finally like put it all together and realize that you could be all of the things?
It took a while. I think there often in one's journey and story, there is a very significant pivotal point where you start reassessing and reflecting, and it took a while to embody that, but once I realized it, the putting the words in the bio together came pretty naturally, because I felt it from my heart. But yeah, just to elaborate on that bio, like, I didn't identify with, how it's even as silly as, on your Instagram page when people like put athlete under their name, or they put like something under their name. I'm like, I feel weird putting anything under my name. Like, this is not who I am. I'm just a bit of everything. And I do a bit of everything really well, but not elite in anything. And I kind of really, I'm like, this is cool, because I get to have fun in the process. And I think the lesson through that is what's worked for me, it's taken time, is to not place my identity too much in one thing. Because
Ooh, yeah.
that's when things can go pear-shaped. When ultimately things don't work out how we envisage them, then if we have focused too much of our identity in that thing, then it's like, oh, the world's crumbling.
100%, 100%. Okay, so with all of these different things that go into kind of creating your life, I realize you're gonna say every day is different, but what does this sort of look like in terms of your life right now? Like, how much time are you spending doing the adventuring? How much time is, in front of the computer doing the prep or the presentations and stuff that go along with it? What's a day in the life, week in the life, month in the life look like here?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with what you said. There is no blueprint at the moment. What started off, so just some context, I was in a big corporate and worked at a property company in sustainability in the built environment, so green building, resource efficiency, all of that. Like, how can we make our built environment just that much more efficient? And really enjoyed my job and was really good at it, and just reached a point where there was a lot going on in my life, and I went through a pretty a heart-wrenching breakup, and that was the catalyst for me. Although I was, doing well at work, and I was still me, like this happy, positive person, but inside I wasn't okay, and there needed to be a lot of work and introspection, and the breakup was just the catalyst to that. And so after being in corporate for these years, I decided to, for the first time, like, challenge myself from an adventure point of view. And I don't know why. There was nothing significant that led me to that decision. It was just like, I want to climb Kilimanjaro, or and I wasn't even really into hiking and climbing at the time. I had nothing against it, but I was just living in Johannesburg, which is a very, very dense city in South Africa. And so then a few months later, I was, climbing Kilimanjaro and standing on the roof of Africa, and realized, oh, wow, I had this very big soulful connection to the mountains specifically, and the high altitude mountains. And so then the curiosity was sparked. And that catapulted me on this journey of looking at my mental health. I think that wasn't really clear earlier when I said, like, that the breakup was a catalyst and I wasn't okay. It was like severe anxiety, depression as a young teenager, and just, I think adventure started giving me tools to add to my toolkit to help me cope better with mental health. And a lot of people find that counterintuitive, because they think, adventure, there's so much unknown, there's so much like things that could go wrong, like all these things, like surely you're just so anxious out there. But it's a complete opposite. I'm not sure if you can relate, but adventure, yes, it is super unknown, but it's when you do it in a progressive way, you're not just throwing yourself into like climbing Everest from the beginning. Firstly, that's highly irresponsible, but like, it's progression and the curiosity. And with that, I started developing this toolkit of like, oh, this is how I can deal with this when I feel like this. And that's what I got through adventure. Okay, so we had that corporate journey. Then I took a sabbatical, started doing more adventures, started getting curious, started realizing actually I'm really good at this high altitude thing. Coming from Cape Town, we're at sea level, there's no snow, no high mountains. Our highest mountain is like 3,000 meters. So it was a very interesting journey and a very not a solo journey from like no one from South Africa was like, hey, I'll come join you, you know, it was like, and so after that sabbatical, I came back and I'd climbed a few mountains and I realized, okay, there are a couple more mountains I'd really love to climb. And then if I still feel the way I'm feeling, I think the 7 summits would be on the cards. Then and only then I would have made that decision. So then how life looked like is I would look for sponsorship to climb the bigger peaks that were more expensive. And by that time, after climbing a few of these reasonably challenging peaks, coming from Cape Town, South Africa, I'd started creating the story that people were following along. Speaking about mental health, raising money for charities. And so people were invested in me and the story I was sharing and could relate. And they were like, hey, this is cool. Because also like, you know, coming from where I came from, it wasn't like I was primed to be this like hardcore athlete from a young age. It's like at any point, like pivot your life, dream these crazy dreams. Yes, I wear these floral summer dresses, but hey, I can also carry 30 kgs on my back and crush you, you know? So it's like, just leveling the playing fields and being like, anyone can do this, really, I'm nothing special, and talking that narrative. And so that's how and so I was doing public speaking, spreading the message, trying to raise money for the climbs, and then doing some consulting in between, but really just trying to get enough financial flow to just fund the next expedition. So that's what that period of my life looked like. So let's say a few years. And then for the last couple of years now, I've also been guiding. So I've been leading treks to Everest Base Camp, leading treks up Kilimanjaro, was involved with assisting at the first blind woman attempt for climbing Mount Everest. Yeah, that could be a podcast for whole. Hey, we should get Sean on this podcast, Molly.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, she is such a badass. She's a blind adventurer.
That's incredible. Oh my gosh.
And I was part of her Everest journey, and it was life-changing. So that's how my life kind of looks like now. Now I'm focusing on how can I help other people realize their climbing dreams. And then I'm also heavily focused on mentorships in young adults. So curating adventure programs for schools, and then weaving in the psychology and the, you know, giving them the tools that I never had. But I feel like there's such a huge gap in society where kids need help. They don't want to sit in an office and speak to psychologists. They need adventure, just levels everything, you know, on a hike. There's no pressure, and there's just this immediate connection because you're bonding outdoors. And I feel like that is going to be such a game changer if we start integrating this more into the teenagers, and also even like early 20s. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of my life. And at the moment, then I also work with a few sustainable brands and do different campaign activations for them, using my voice in that way. And so, I'm just on the lookout for any sort of special project that comes on my table and seeing how I can assist. And so at the moment, it's just, I'm taking each year as it comes. Each year there's 1 or 2 big projects that I'll work with, and then all the things that I've mentioned will filter in between.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love it. Okay, so backing way up, I now have so many follow-up questions. Backing way up, it's a lot of the time when you hear stories like this, it's someone who was in a 9-to-5 corporate job that they absolutely hated. They were miserable in the job, and that makes leaving really easy. But it sounds like you actually really enjoyed what you did. So how was it? Like, how did you make that decision to actually exit a job that you that theoretically was actually like good?
Yeah. Yeah, and it was an incredible journey, that stage in my life. I think to put it simply, it just felt like it ran its course. There was no, and I think this is such a key messaging as well, is like, often, I think often why people are so afraid of change is because it often comes out of necessity. Something happens and then they're like, oh my gosh, I have to change because I can't do what I was doing anymore because I became broke, or because it hurt me, or I don't know what. So I have to change. And they're like, oh, this
Mm.
is so scary. As opposed to eliciting change out of a space of, actually, things are okay, but change would be good.
Hmm.
I could learn something new from this change. So for me, there's just an inner feeling and knowing. And then also having started that journey of adventure, and what that was giving me, I'd never had that exchange of energy before, and realized that was something I wanted to explore more. So it was more chasing something that I was curious about, as opposed to leaving something I hated.
Hmm. Oh, I love that. I really like the idea that things, you don't need to be at like a rock bottom or in a like have something change on you to decide to make a change. Because I think
Yeah.
that's how a lot of the narratives around these big adventures and stuff go, which isn't bad, but I think, a lot of us that are just kind of like just cruising along normally, like it's also, you can have a big change then too.
Yeah, exactly.
The other thing I wanted to kind of come back to is talking about anxiety and how adventure seems like it would be anxiety provoking, but actually like isn't. And what I'm kind of thinking is, do you think part of that's because like when you are doing these adventures, you're very much focused on the present, and like you might still have worries or like concerns about what's happening in the moment, but it's very much like you're just right there, you're in it, versus, when you're sitting at your like desk job thinking about like, why hasn't this person texted me, or like, what did this email mean? It's all very like future focused and like kind of outside of yourself. Thoughts?
100%. Yeah, I think we can relate on that. Yeah, I mean, and obviously there are degrees of mental health struggles and battles where depression is very different to anxiety, although they can often be linked. And I'm not against medication. I think it can be a stepping point, a stepping block. Uh, but ultimately, I think one has to take initiative to try get the toolbox, and that can only come from you. And again, I just want to say, like, extreme mental health things that like bipolar and all of that, like I can't comment on that.
Hmm.
I wouldn't want to. But from my experience, the depression, I got the help through medication, and then I had a super supportive family. And then that kind of started evolving into more of an anxiety, and it was all about like the pressures and and thinking about the future or the past, so you're not in the present moment. And again, like, that's exactly what adventure is, because um the adventures are challenging you to a degree where you have to stay so focused, because it could end really badly if you don't. And it's that power of the present moment that just keeps you um so focused.
Hmm. And I'm very glad that you just mentioned both the medication and working with a therapist, because I do think, while I'm like such a huge fan of adventure and nature and being outdoors and moving your body as like a help to these things, we've had experts on before that always say like running is not your therapy, like it is
Yeah.
not a substitute for it. So I do think it is really important to kind of mention like there's a difference between doing these adventures as like this very empowering kind of style that you're doing them, versus like using them almost like as a tool to like run away from what's actually going on in your life.
Yeah, escapism versus kind of more acknowledgement, I guess.
Hmm.
And that's why you are like, one can often find as well, like, it can be another form of addiction. you
Yes,
know
absolutely.
so to also have those conversations and be like, how do you feel if you don't push yourself on a day or two or three? A lot of people who are only used to pushing themselves actually freak out when they don't. And that's a form of mental health struggle that needs to be also addressed and looked at. And I've been there as well. Like I've taken like more than one rest day in a week, and I've been like, what is happening? Like I don't feel okay. But it was just also how the mental health struggle was translating in my life at that point. So it's always just being so conscious of what's happening, and also then I think they're not judging it and just allowing yourself to sit with that emotion and that feeling, and just talking to someone else about it, even if it's just a friend, and being like, hey, this is what I'm feeling. And it could sound completely silly, but you have hopefully a friendship group or a family member that can just meet you at that irrational place, you know, and just hold space.
Yes, for sure. Okay, we've mentioned 7 summits a few times here. Give us an overview of what the heck the 7 summits are for people who are not familiar.
Sure. So the 7 summits is the highest mountain on each continent of the planet, of the Earth, of planet Earth.
Planet Earth.
Planet Earth. And you know, so that includes Mount Everest in Nepal, and you know, I can list them. So in Africa, it's Kilimanjaro, actually the highest freestanding mountain in the world, which is interesting. So when you're climbing Kili, there are no other mountains around you attached to Kilimanjaro or around you that are taller than you. And which is, just having this freestanding mountain is very, very fascinating experience. And then you've got Aconcagua in South America, which is the highest mountain in the southern hemisphere, but then obviously the highest mountain in South America. And then in North America, you have Denali, also known as Mount McKinley back in the day. And the interesting thing about Mount Denali is that some people's experience on Mount Denali say it's harder than Everest. So Mount Denali is in Alaska, and very remote and very different style of climbing. Like each mountain offers something different, and you can't really compare the one to the other. So with Mount Denali, it's completely self-supported. So you're on a rope team of like 3, maybe bigger team of like 10 or 12, but rope teams of 3 to 4 to, you know, if you for safety purposes, if you fall into a crevasse. You're carrying sleds with gear of like 30 kgs. Sorry, I don't do pounds, times by almost, I think, 2.2.
A lot.
Times 2.2. And then a backpack of, you know, 20 kgs as well. And you arrive at camp, everyone sets up, you know, you don't have additional help from like Sherpa guides and all of that. So it's very physical, which I quite enjoy. And then also the weather is so unpredictable, and almost like way more unpredictable than Mount Everest. So with Denali, it's like if there's a storm and a bad, you know, weather roll in, you almost have to turn around and can't summit, because you only have about 3 weeks to climb, based on permits and based on like the food supplies that you bring in. And all of that, whereas Mount Everest is so extremely high. You have the additional support of Sherpa, so you do carry, you know, a reasonable amount of gear, but you know, you don't have to set up a tent, and so that's a reality. So the Mount Denali can be harder than Mount Everest. I'm undecided, to be honest. It's because nothing, at the end of the day, you have to take those steps on Everest. No one can do it for you. And that altitude, when you reach the death zone, 8,000 meters and up, so again, I don't know feet, your body is slowly dying. Your organs are shutting down. Nothing can take that away, you know, like no help. No, it's like you're experiencing that moment, you know. So that's, and then you've got like Mount Everest in Asia, and Mount Vincent in Antarctica, which is also just a wild experience. I say Antarctica is like Mother Nature in her birthday suit. So it's like just this wild. Every time something in my life is like going wrong, I'm just like, you've been to Antarctica. Like, how wild is that? Like, it's just so grateful for that opportunity. And I did end up getting a little bit of frostbite there. The temperatures were just so cold, and that was even, we had like good weather, and I still managed. So Mount Vincent in Antarctica was definitely colder than my experience on Mount Everest, which was also fascinating. And then in Australia, you've got Mount Kosciuszko or Carson's Pyramid. And why I say "or" is because the traditional, like from years ago, it was Mount Kosciuszko in Australia, but the peak is only like just over 2,000 meters, Australia being a continent. But then the purists were like, hey, that's not really like a mountain. You can, like, it's a trekking peak. So then they expanded the area to say, okay, let's make it Oceania. And that includes Papua New Guinea. And then there's a peak there called Carson's Pyramid, which is more technical. It's about 4,800 meters. But now what's happened is that mountain's been closed for about 3 years due to tribal war and civil unrest. So people are getting kidnapped. It's just very unstable. So the climbing community have kind of reverted back to using Kosciuszko in Australia as the seventh. So yeah, so that's a brief summary.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I have to ask, like, is it weird having a Sherpa guide with you? Like, what is that experience like? Because I feel like I just can't even really fathom how that feels.
Yeah. So also some context around that, and I love talking about this, is so the term Sherpa actually doesn't mean like porter. The term Sherpa is where a lot of the Nepalese come from. So it's like the community. So on their passport, it will even say like Pasang Sherpa. So it's like part of their heritage. So that's quite cool to acknowledge that. And then I have formed so many close friendship with my Sherpa brothers. It's like this next level bond that I see them as a climbing partner.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I see it. So I want to be able to show up for them just how they can show up for me. So I want to, like, that's just how, like, hopefully most climbers share this sentiment, but not everyone does. But you can't get caught up with everyone else's thoughts and styles. So you form a friendship with a new climber, and so it's like a buddy system. So like when you both have oxygen, the oxygen's in your backpack, so you can't change it yourself or check each other's flow rates or check how much oxygen there is in each bottle. They can't do that alone, so it's like, also like, what can I do? Hey, I've got extra snacks they often don't take, because that's also, I'm like, hey, do you want some of my food? Do you want some of my water? Like, it's mutual for me, the climbing experience with all the guys that I've climbed with. And going forward now, like Pasang, who I climbed with 2 years ago, he started his own guiding company. So often when I have clients, I will link up with him and we'll do it together. So it's about the opportunities you can create with the Sherpa guys,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I love that. I think it's just kind of like a good one to acknowledge, because I think it's such an interesting differentiation between like a Denali versus an Everest. And I'm glad you mentioned like the amount of stuff you have to carry up Denali, because I think Everest gets all the credit for being like the mountain to climb. But as you're talking these through, I'm like, oh, Denali actually seems like it might be right up there. So
and to that, I would be super intrigued to see the stats on women climbers for both mountains. Because when I was on Denali, my team, we were 11 and I was the only female on my team. And then when I was climbing, I saw maybe 3 other female, 1 guide, and maybe 1 or 2 others. So because of its pure physicality, I guess. But and then I think a few people who have climbed Everest have not necessarily done Denali, although they may have climbed some other 7,000 meter peaks in Nepal, which are also super challenging. But then again, you don't have to carry all your own stuff. Although there are also people who climb Everest who don't use Sherpa, who climb, you've got the athletes, Kilian, all of them, they climb Everest and all these other peaks. So, and they do it alpine style, which means just fast and light, and they climatized before, maybe on another peak. And so there's so many different variations in which you can experience a high altitude climb, which is super cool.
Hmm. Okay, you did just hit on a point here of being one of the few women. I mean, first of all, is there a peak that seemed to have more women on it? And second, I mean, what is it like being the only woman on there? Do you feel like the experience is different? Obviously, you don't know if the experience is different, given that you have not had the guy experience. But does it feel like you're treated differently as you're doing these adventures?
I haven't had any of those experiences, which is super cool. Like pretty chill. So I really don't mind like peeing in front of a guy. Like it's like, okay, I'm gonna pee, like turn around, or but I'm gonna pee right here. Like you do what you need to do, you know? And I think and I understand that's not the same, like culturally, like how you've been brought up, or all of that kind of stuff, you know. And so I don't mind, and I wasn't treated differently. I feel like if I wasn't as strong as I was, like it would have been, I would have felt, if I couldn't carry what they carried, it would have made me feel potentially like less. Um, so I haven't really like navigated that within myself, but I was super proud. Like all the group gear, we divvied it up equally, we carried it equally. I was like like felt good within the group. Um, and in general, like my climbing experiences, I haven't had any team members that have been like, oof, like ruining the experience, or like I've been super lucky because I have heard some stories you're like, oh, oof, you know, like anyway, but I've been quite lucky. And also like it was super cool, like on the Denali expedition, like the one guy was saying, he was like, it's so much nicer having some women on the team because it like changes the dynamics. Like I don't think the dudes necessarily just want to be like a group of dudes climbing, you know. So it was cool to hear that from him. And yeah, I guess that's kind of what I have to say on that.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so how does one get strong enough to carry these giant packs and, we'll talk about altitude in a second, but just more of like the strength and the hiking side of it. How do you train for an expedition like this?
Yeah, I mean, well, for me, I'm tall, and I've always felt like that is a slight advantage. Despite I'm not like I'm pretty lean, but I've got like strengths. I just feel like you just immediately at a disadvantage if you're shorter, no matter how strong you are. I mean, it's just science. If
That's
you're
me.
packed,
I'm a
again,
compact human.
a couple of the women guides that I know who are quite like like I've seen them around, they're all pretty short, but they're so strong, and their packs are like, if you put the pack next to them, it's like half the size of them, just from a
Hmm.
height. So no,
Well,
I mean,
and running, I notice this all the time. Like if I'm, I can run as fast as most of the guys around me, but the second we actually hit a hill and start hiking it, suddenly
yeah,
they're just so far ahead of me because their legs are longer, so their hiking strides are longer, and I
yes,
can't compete with that.
interesting. Yes, that makes sense. So I mean, you just gotta train. So like I would, we have peaks at home that I would just throw on a backpack with 20, 30 kgs and just hike up. You just have to do it. And pull the sleds, and I didn't actually practice with any sort of sleds. Can't really. I know some people do the whole like they do the tires around their waist. Well, they pull, there's rope around the tires, the rope goes around your waist, and then the tire gets dragged. I never did that. Um, but so the interesting thing about altitude as well is a lot of the smaller humans actually do quite well from a physiological point of view. Also, like the bigger muscles you have, muscles require more oxygen to function. So as soon as there's less oxygen, your muscles aren't working. So the taller the human sometimes, or the bigger the human from a muscle point of view, it can actually be disadvantageous for high altitude. So that's also very interesting from a science point of view.
Hmm.
I think that's, if you get those elite athletes that also do the high altitude things, like a lot of the good high altitude men climbers, and also, like, if you look at Hillary Nelson and all of them, they're not big humans. They're just
Mm.
power and efficient. And that, you can use systems where you don't have to carry all the gear at once. You can cache gear. carry half the load, cache it up higher, come back, carry the rest up. Or if you've already acclimatized before, you don't have to climb it at such a slow rate. So then you can almost be like, okay, there's a weather window, and because they're such strong athletes, they can go for longer, and then they can climb the peak faster and carry less. So that's like more alpine style, which is also cool. With Denali, there's just like you in your group, and you know, to be safe, you want to have enough food, enough gear, and that's why those first few days your loads are super heavy until you get to about like camp 1-2. Then you start doing the caching as well, and you drop the sled, but the packs are still like 30 kgs. But what people are also doing there, and I've done it once with my Everest Lhotse. So when I did an Everest Lhotse back-to-back summit. So Lhotse is the 4th highest mountain in the world. And I wanted to do that double summit because it was like a little ego thing, which is fine. I always say a little bit ego is good. Because no South African had done that double summit. And yeah, no South African women had climbed Lhotse. But for me, the double summit is because often the men set the records first, especially in the field of mountaineering. So I really wanted to have this like kind of little record for South Africa. So that was driving that. But I say, you know, like Lhotse was such a soulful mountain. Like Everest is like a little bit of the ego mountain, but Lhotse is just so soulful, that Kulwa. Have you watched the documentary where Hillary and her, the late Hillary and her partner ski down the Lhotse Kulwa? It's a North Face documentary.
To find it.
North Face documentary, the first ski descent of Lhotse. So they climbed up with their skis, and then they skied down this Kulwa. It was just like, it's such an incredible experience. And then the whole time you're climbing Lhotse, you get to witness the sun rise on the slopes of Everest. So to your left, you have that scene. To the right, you have like the moon rising. It's just like wild. Anyway, I diverge. So why I could climb Lhotse like back to back within 24 hours is because I've put in the time to acclimatize already for Everest. So people are doing these, you can climb a few 8,000ers or high altitude peaks in a row. You just have to have taken a reasonable amount of time to do one, and then you can do the rest pretty fast. So how the season works with Denali, it falls kind of straight after Everest. So people summit Everest and then they fly straight on, and then they can climb Denali more alpine style, lighter, less gear, and do it in a shorter period of time. They've just got to time the weather perfectly and be like, okay, I'm going to go now. So that is also just a little bit of science and how it works with altitude and how you can, you know, climb in different styles and why you would climb in different styles.
So when you mentioned acclimating to altitude, what does that look like? Does that just mean getting to the base camp and like staying there for a bit? Or do you do any kind of like breath work or stuff like off the mountain, like prior to these? How do you handle the acclimation stuff?
You know, well, the first thing about altitude is that you actually don't know how your body's going to react prior to having ever climbed a high altitude mountain. So first you just get experience to altitude. So like trekking, peak, Kilimanjaro, how did your body adapt? How did it feel? And then you kind of have a benchmark. And then I don't personally do breath work or anything like that. I think something that's hugely advantageous is if you do work on your ability to utilize your lung capacity and there's so much research. I just haven't given it enough of my energy and time, but I know that it's so powerful. And in general, breath in general is just a game changer. So personally, I don't focus too much on that, although I have dabbled. And then once you get to the peak, so what the trekking into any peak, or the first few days, it's kind of important to take it quite slowly as your body's just adjusting. And simple things like hydrating excessive amounts before and during really helps. Like it's those simple things. And then it's this whole concept of climbing high, sleeping low. So you can't just shoot for the summit if you aren't acclimatized. You need to climb up a bit higher, maybe sleep at a higher camp, and then you come back down. And then you rest a few days. You maybe trek around the area. You very rarely want to be too stationary in one area. You actually just want some movement of some sort that helps the production of the red blood cells. but base camp, Everest base camp, is just such a tricky altitude because it's at 5,500 meters again. Sorry, don't know the feet, but it's at this altitude where your body's just actually not getting, it's not benefiting you being at that altitude. Just being at that altitude, it's too high to actually reap any sort of benefits. Like when athletes do train at altitude or live at altitude, it's usually between like 2,000 and 3,000 meters. Like the height of Flagstaff in Arizona, like that's quite a big hub for athletes. That's where you get a lot of the benefits. But then at Everest Base Camp, you just like, also again, like if you were to get sick, you're just going to get sicker. Very rarely can you get better. So your emphasis on hygiene and just staying healthy is so important on big high altitude mountaineering as well, because you just can't recover. So acclimatization, back to your question, it takes a while to do that process. So an Everest expedition can take 6 to 8 weeks, because you also buffer in, you buffer in extra days. So you do the trekking in, which is 10 days, and then you do some training around camp, or you do a few hikes around base camp, and then you like scope out a good weather window for a rotation. It's called rotations. You climb up the mountain, come down the mountain, you rest up a bit, you play around a bit, and then you kind of do the same thing again. And then you like also just wait for the right weather. So you have those buffer days built into a program like that. But any sort of high altitude mountaineering, if you're arriving on the mountain, not acclimatized, it'll take a while to get there. There's research with the hypoxic tents as well that you can put over your bed. Again, it's not, and that can go up to like 7,000 meters or 6,000. But again, it doesn't mimic altitude in its entirety. It incorporates CO2, so it doesn't incorporate pressure. So that's the difference. So again, and also it's like a lot of controversy around it, because like, pre-expedition, you want to be climbing a lot, you want to be training a lot, and then you need to recover really well. So if you're sleeping in a hypoxic tent, you're actually not recovering properly. So your training might not be optimized. So it's quite a big balance between, if you want to use a tent, how to incorporate that properly. So I just think, the best is to acclimatize on the mountain. And then potentially, if you have capacity, once you're acclimatized, why not climb 1 or 2 other mountains after that?
I like that. Be efficient with once you're acclimatized, really use that. Makes sense. Okay, kind of a weird question. Were there any like practical things that were surprising after your first adventure expedition? Like all I'm thinking as you're talking about, like, this can take, a few weeks. I'm like, how often are you getting to, shower? What's the washroom situation like here? How much are you like changing, like, all of your clothes and stuff? Like, what is like the real, like, what it's actually like outside of the breathtaking views and like the, spiritual journey?
Yeah. Well, for the most part, because it's so cold, I don't mind, you don't get like super dirty. But again, it's different so with Aconcagua, 7,000 meters, it can be quite a dusty mountain. So I feel like I was probably quite dirty then. So that's like 2 weeks that you don't shower for. But then again, you could potentially shower at the base camp facility of any mountain, mainly Aconcagua or Everest Base Camp. They do have some sort of water system that you can wipe down. So Everest as well, you're not really going longer than a week to 10 days without some sort of access to water to like wash down. Denali was the longest, was almost 3 weeks without showering or anything. You have moments where if it's a good day, you just like dibs the tent for like 20 minutes, being like, no one come in, I'm getting naked and I'm gonna be using my wet wipes. And that's how it goes. I've never found, you do get a couple. I've climbed with some boys that are a bit younger and they kind of smell really bad. It's like, please, you want to use some of my wet wipes now, but it's just part of it. You kind of hope that everyone can take care of themselves, but you also understand you're in the mountains and you can't exactly get like pretentious about it.
Yeah. Okay, talk me through what how long it takes to plan one of these adventures and like the full execution from start to finish. Like, what does the planning process, if I'm just like, I want to climb Denali, what does that look like? Because I imagine
Yeah,
it's not just like how to climb Denali on Google and like,
I-
boom, I'm done.
no, I mean, no expedition is the same. And so I guess it just comes down to like, okay, if you pick a certain mountain that you would like, let's say Denali, it's like, firstly, you have to assess, like, am I a novice or do I have experience? If I'm a novice, okay, what peaks are good progression to climb Denali? Or like also get, I would say before that all, like, what is your why? Like, why do you want to climb this mountain? And like unpack that for a while. And then I'd be like, okay, these reasons are pretty like I feel quite aligned to them. They serve me. They're part of my mission and who I want to be, not just like, oh, because I want to beat this person and they did it then, and then it's like, oh shit, will probably not work out. But if you really think it's something that's it's going to just be life changing for yourself, and then and let's say you're a novice, then it's like, okay, what peaks are recommended? Or like a first good step as well, what I did is I started reaching out to all the South Africans who had climbed that peak specifically, or peaks that I wanted to get to. By reaching out to them, I could have coffee with them and get to hear their stories firsthand. So then I am developing this little book of knowledge, and that was very valuable. And then progression, everything's about progression, and the mountains deserve that from a respect point of view. You never want to show up to a mountain completely unprepared. So what does that preparation look like? And that can be different for every mountain, but that would be a necessary step in terms of prep to the mountain. And then logistics as well, you build that up through like me, like climbing with different groups, climbing with different people, what worked for me, what didn't. And then you navigate through that learning process like any sport, really. It's just like, and then what works for you may not work for someone else. So it's just about becoming curious and being responsible, and just always checking in with your why am I doing this, why am I doing this, um and running with that.
I really like the idea of kind of looking for starter mountains to try out before hitting the big one. And I mean, I think this speaks to, these things really should be things that take a while to plan and prepare for versus kind of an impatience of like, I want to go climb it now. The journey to getting there should really be a like big chunk of like the thing as a whole.
Exactly.
I love that. Okay, so some of your work prior to this and even now is still in the sustainability space. There's a lot of talk right now about, these adventures and, whether it's bike touring or this kind of stuff or even running, like how do you balance the ideas of sustainability with, getting to go on these adventures? Because I think you can hold them together, but it's definitely tricky.
Yeah, and I think it's such a necessary conversation to have. And one can get overwhelmed with like, what is the right thing to do, or people judging, or people. At the end of the day, I think a big message I also wanted to say is like being able to adventure and do what we do is such a privilege. It's
Huge.
such a privilege, and to always be acutely aware of the bigger picture. And for me, it's like, okay, then how can I use the adventure to be a platform to bring about change in other ways? So that has been my big why, whether it's like linking it back to raising funds for my charities here in South Africa. I mean, I'm sure everyone knows how much poverty is in South Africa and how much help is needed. So if it can be used as a platform to do that and bring about change like that, or as having the conversations around mental health and what we can do, not letting mental health dictate what you can and can't do. I think that's a very important conversation to have. And then, at the end of the day, to get to destinations, you're gonna have to fly there most of the time. Some people do some gnarly things about like biking to every summit and all of that. And you can't do it all. And as well, like I'm plant-based, but it's never a narrative I push on anyone, because it's like, if you can just live a conscious life and do the best you can do, and that can look and translate in so many different ways. And someone may want to push their agenda or not, but it's like, how can you stay true to your values and try the best to make a difference. No one's perfect, but if we can all just try to do something a little better, I think that's just a great formula.
I love that. I love that.
Mm.
Okay, and last thing I wanted to touch on, I mean, we could talk about any one of these climbs for like hours, obviously, but as a whole, I mean, what does it look like when you finish either one of these climbs or when you've hit all 7? Because I think the come down from these, as far as like the mental side of it goes, it's huge. Like coming back to the why that you just mentioned, yeah, the bit of like, okay, so that's done.
Yeah.
Now what? So how do you prepare for that? And how has that been for you?
Yeah. And you know, it actually, this conversation links quite nicely back to the very first thing we spoke about, and that is, where do you place your identity? And that's something I've had to work on a lot, because it happened. I had an unsuccessful Everest expedition, actually. It was quite wild in 2021. We got to Camp 4, the last camp, 8,000 meters, like one push, like you very close to the summit, close. I mean, it's still like freaking hard. But there's cyclone rolled in. There was these cyclones that were coming that were so unpredicted, like it wasn't in any of the forecasts. There were some teams going out, some turning around. There was a lot of confusion. It was the year just after COVID. We were getting reports from base camp that so many people were getting tested with COVID. There's so much fear on the mountain. People didn't know what to do from so many different aspects, COVID, cyclone, everything. So at the end of the day, like it was our expedition was called off at that point. And navigating that, because I think a lot of the time when we have these big goals and adventures, we're like when I do Everest, then I know I can do this, I can launch this, I can speak about this will kickstart my career in this way, and you've placed so much of your identity and your then I can on this single expedition or single adventure. And I think that is a tricky place to play in. And I think what I found up until that point is, you know, how many like sacrifices I made along the way, to be like, okay, no, I just need like focus. But it's like, because such big expeditions and adventures do require a lot of focus and energy. But I think like for me personally, if I can incorporate more balance, and I know it's kind of like a cliche thing, but I think that'll kind of, it just served me better. So after that expedition, being like, okay, kind of re-strategizing, like, okay, who am I? And not to be so focused on that summit. So then the come down after, you know, adventures that don't work out or summits that don't work out. And even after that, you know, like, because like media were following me, and because it was like a big deal back here. And I was like, initially I was like, no, I don't, like, I didn't summit. Like, I know it was, I didn't think I like failed myself. It wasn't like I had this negative self-talk, but ultimately it didn't work out how I wanted it to work out. And I felt like, oh, I have nothing to say to media. And then I processed that luckily in a reasonably fast time. And I realized, holy shit, you know, talking about setbacks and failures is so important. And we live in a society where, you know, people have their keynote presentations about summiting Everest. But like whenever I give a keynote, I'm like, let's talk about all the shit, like all the times, you know, you failed, and let's celebrate. Because that's actually when we show more courage and bravery, is in those moments, not the summit moments. The summit moments is physically hard, but the true courage and bravery comes from turning around, comes from actually, this is not responsible. Actually, I didn't succeed. Let's talk about it. And so I found that was so well received. And I think it's such an important part of the puzzle as an adventurer. So to then again, to circle back to your question, is like the come down. How do I deal with that come down? It's basically just to have things in perspective, realizing adventure is a privilege, and being able to do this is just so grateful to have these experiences and to do what I do. And if things don't work out, or if I've summited, also what you've spoken about, like summiting the mountains, is like, that doesn't start, me and my mountains don't start and end in a specific amount of summits. summits, and then can catapult a new business opportunity, can catapult you meet certain people, maybe you want to do something along this line. So it's just seeing it as a platform for discovery and opportunities and potential, I think, to look at it like that. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Oh, so good. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, we have to wrap up there because that was just like the perfect answer to that question. So let everyone know where they can find you and follow along. Your Instagram is gorgeous. And even if people aren't interested in climbing mountains, they have to follow you on there because it is so awe-inspiring.
Thanks, Molly. So my Instagram is just my name, Remy Kloos, and I try and share as much as possible in there. I love to write and I love to just share the mountains and the magic. And for me, it's like a very spiritual and soulful experience when I climb. So I like to share that, the wonder, the awe, the limitless energy that we can tap into through the natural world. Very, very strong believer of that. It's not a fight against the mountain, it's a dance. So it's figuring that out. And I like to share about that. So Remy Kloos is my Instagram. And then my website is also remykloos.com. And then various ways in which we can collaborate, work together. I'm always open to the conversations. And just like, how we were connected through our friend Tegan, it's like so cool that we have this group of like badass women doing cool things, supporting each other, putting people in touch with one another, and that's what it's all about. So so basically, yeah, if anyone wants to reach out, please do, and we can chat.
Love it. Oh, Remy, thank you so much. This was such a fun, inspiring conversation.
Thank you again for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.